For generations, the fishermen of the South China Sea navigated by memory. They knew where the reefs were. They knew where the fish gathered. They knew which waters were safe and which weren't. The sea changed constantly. The weather, the tides, the currents. But the reefs didn't. At least, they weren't supposed to. Then one morning, a fisherman noticed something strange. A reef looked bigger. Not dramatically, just a little. Enough to make him wonder if he'd remembered it wrong. He hadn't. A few months later, more sand appeared. Then construction vessels. Then the reef was no longer a reef at all. It was becoming land. And the strangest part? Nobody outside these waters seemed to notice. What started as a few fishermen's rumors was now visible from space. Entire reefs, places that had been underwater for thousands of years, were growing. Not naturally, artificially. By 2016, 7 of these reefs had transformed into fully operational islands. Runways, harbors, radar installations, barracks. It was, by any measure, the most ambitious island-building project in modern history. And here's what almost nobody understood at the time. The islands were never the real story. The real story was what they destroyed to build them. Because beneath every one of those islands lies a coral reef that had existed for thousands of years. Hundreds of acres of living reef gone, buried, smothered under millions of tons of sand and concrete. And the coral didn't just die where the islands were built. The dredging kicked up clouds of sand and debris that spread for kilometers. It blocked sunlight. It suffocated marine life far beyond the construction zone. Fish populations collapsed. Breeding grounds vanished. An entire ecosystem, one that had supported fishing communities for generations, was being erased. And that's when things got strange. Because the people who noticed first weren't environmentalists. They weren't activists. They were the fishermen. For decades, these waters had provided for their families. Fish, income, a way of life. Now they were watching it disappear. And they started asking a question that would turn out to be far more important than anyone realized. If the islands weren't being built for them, who were they being built for? When the rest of the world finally caught up to what was happening, most people assumed they understood. China wanted military bases. Case closed. And yes, the islands have runways. They have radar installations. They have harbors capable of receiving warships. But here's what doesn't add up. If all you wanted was military positioning, why build on reefs that are tiny, isolated, and hundreds of kilometers from anything? Why not just use existing islands? Why pour billions into creating land that didn't exist? Unless the military bases were never the objective. They were the cover story. Because the South China Sea isn't just water. It's one of the most important trade routes on the planet. Roughly 1/3 of all global shipping passes through these waters. Oil tankers from the Middle East, container ships from China, electronics, food, fuel, clothes. Trillions of dollars of goods every single year. And if you control the water, you control the highway. But here's the problem with water. You can't build a checkpoint on it. You can't put a radar station on it. You can't claim it as territory. Unless you build something to stand on. Suddenly, those isolated reefs don't look isolated anymore. They look like positions. Strategic positions along one of the world's most critical trade routes. And once you realize that, everything about this story changes. Because the islands weren't built for what you can see. The runways, the harbors, the barracks, they were built for what you can't see. Influence. The ability to say, this water belongs to us. And the truly unsettling part? It worked. Now at this point you might be thinking, fine, they wanted the islands, but how do you actually build land in the middle of the ocean? How do you take a reef that's barely visible at low tide and turn it into an island with a 3,000-meter runway? The answer is one of the most extraordinary engineering operations ever attempted. China deployed the Tianjin, the celestial whale, at the time the most powerful dredging ship in Asia. This machine doesn't just move sand. It grinds through coral reef like a saw through wood. A rotating cutting head breaks the reef apart. A massive pump sucks up the debris. A pipeline, sometimes kilometers long, shoots it to the construction site. And the Tianjin wasn't alone. China assembled the largest dredging fleet the world had ever seen. Dozens of vessels, working around the clock, day after day, month after month. The speed was extraordinary. In less than 2 years, a single reef, Fiery Cross Reef, went from a barely visible patch of coral to a 2.7 square kilometer island with a runway, a harbor, and permanent structures. 677 acres of new land, where there had been nothing but ocean. And they didn't do it on one reef, they did it on 7. In total, across all 7 islands, China created over 3,200 acres of new land, an area larger than many small cities. But building the island is only half the problem. The ocean doesn't want it there. Waves wear things down, storms destroy, currents shift. So every island had to be wrapped in a seawall, a protective ring of rock and concrete designed to absorb the ocean's punishment. Without them, the islands wouldn't last a decade. With them, they might last a century. The engineering achievement is genuinely remarkable, but here's the thing the engineers don't always mention. Every grain of sand that built these islands came from somewhere, and that somewhere was the seabed, dredged, scraped, suctioned, creating vast underwater scars that will take generations to heal, if they ever do. While governments argued over maps and shipping lanes and territorial claims, the people who actually lived with the consequences were dealing with something far more immediate: survival. Because when the fishing grounds disappear, so does the income. When military patrols increase, the waters become dangerous. When the reef you fished your entire life gets buried under concrete, you don't get a say in the decision. You just have to live with the result. This is the part of the story that rarely makes the headlines. There are millions of people across Southeast Asia who depend on the South China Sea for food and livelihood. They're not generals. They're not diplomats. They're not shipping executives. They're just people. People whose lives are being reshaped by a project they never asked for, in waters they fished for centuries, by decisions made thousands of kilometers away. And the cruelest irony, the islands might not even last. Climate scientists have been warning for years. The South China Sea is one of the most vulnerable regions on Earth to rising sea levels. The same sea walls that protect the islands today may not hold against the storms of 2050. The coral that's already dead won't grow back fast enough to provide natural protection. And the fish populations that collapsed won't recover while the dredging continues. So here's the question nobody wants to answer. What happens when the islands start sinking? Not a hypothetical, a genuine engineering problem. Because if these islands become unlivable, or worse, if they start breaking apart and releasing all that dredged material back into the ocean, the environmental damage could spread far beyond the original construction zone. The project that was supposed to secure influence for generations might not outlast the people who built it. For most of human history, geography was something you inherited. Mountains existed, rivers existed, coastlines existed, countries fought over them, but nobody built them. Then someone started building islands, and suddenly geography became negotiable. That's the real story of the South China Sea. Not who owns the islands, not who claims the water, but what happens when a country looks at open ocean and decides it needs land. Because once one nation proves it's possible, everyone else starts paying attention. Not necessarily because they want to copy it, but because they have to respond. Reality has a strange advantage. Once it exists, it becomes part of every future decision. And the islands do exist. You can see them from space. Aircraft land on them. Ships dock beside them. They're real. Whether that reality is permanent is a different question entirely. The islands are there. You can see them from space. Aircraft land on them. Warships dock beside them. They are real, built on top of reefs that had been alive for thousands of years, in waters that 7 countries claim as their own. Whether they last another 100 years, or whether the sea takes them back, nobody can say. But the question underneath all of it hasn't been answered. If a country can build land in the middle of the ocean and simply declare it theirs, where does that end? If this is the kind of story you come here for, subscribe. Titanprojects. We build the impossible.